Good afternoon and welcome to the International Peace Institute, and thank you for joining us here today. Today's discussion, held in partnership with the Government of Canada, is looking at the very timely topic of senior leadership training for UN peace operations. The report of the High-Level Independent Panel of Peace Operations describes leadership as one of the most crucial factors in the success and failure of UN peace operations. Senior leaders face many challenges in implementing mandates that lead to the overall political strategy in increasingly hostile and in complex environments. Reports including the 2015 reports of the UN Office of Internal Oversight has stressed the need for strengthened training from selection to deployment through to the end of assignment. Over the past 2 years, IPI has been working on the topic of senior leadership training, developing knowledge and resources to support the efforts to prepare senior leaders for the contemporary challenges they face in UN peacekeeping operations. In line with this, IPI has produced 8 training scenarios covering a range of issues that senior leaders will likely face during their deployment. These scenarios are based on complex crisis situations, but go beyond the operational responses, trying to support team building, leadership skills, and looking at critical thinking whilst facing these contemporary challenges. Some of the topics cover issues such as the delegation of authority, integrated planning for a transition, protection of civilians, and engaging with the host state. Today, we are very proud to officially launch these scenarios in both English and French for open access and hope that these will be very useful for all those involved in training and preparation of senior leaderships for deployment. For each scenario, we've included a training document which outlines the situation, a detailed facilitator's guide, as well as the country context and the maps and necessary resources to use these scenarios. All of this is downloadable on our new website, which we have just launched on the IPI website, and the scenarios can easily be adapted for different contexts. In addition to these scenarios, this project has been working to support the understanding and analysis of the challenges in training senior leaders and the barriers present. In line with this, we have recently published a paper by Kevin Kennedy and Laura Power looking at senior leadership training in UN peace operations. And this is the topic of the panel and the discussion here today. Broadly, why senior leadership training is necessary, what is being done to prepare leaders, and what are the barriers present. Before I introduce the panel that I have up here with me, we have 2 short opening remarks from 2 individuals who have been integral to the implementation of this project. First, I would like to welcome Military Advisor Brigadier General Martin Girard from the Permanent Mission of Canada to the United Nations to provide some welcoming remarks and reflections on why training is such a central priority for the Government of Canada.
Wow, this has almost looked like a family reunion, and I know a lot of military advisors are here taking a break on our intensive C-34 discussion. Thank you very much to the International Peace Institute for hosting today's discussion. I'm pleased to provide welcoming remarks to open today's discussion on behalf of the Government of Canada. Today's peacekeepers face increasingly challenging conditions on the ground. At the same time, they are operating in more complex political contexts with more demanding mandates. This places an increased burden on the senior leaders of peacekeeping missions to be both commanders and diplomats. Canada is working with our other peacekeeping partners to make peacekeeping more efficient. We can all agree on the importance of training, but it can be difficult to identify and respond to the gap in training in a coordinated manner. To help respond to these challenges, Canada was pleased to provide support to this project with IPI. We believe this project helps provide valuable insight into some of the gaps that limit the training of our peacekeeping leaders. Our discussion today will touch on all elements of training for senior leaders and will hopefully motivate us to address some of these gaps and respond to the findings from IPI. As you may know, Canada was also pleased to sponsor 3 senior mission leaders courses in Senegal, Ottawa, and the next one in March in Ghana. As I mentioned, Canada has funded, hosted, and sends Canadians to the senior mission leadership course because, for us, leadership is a fundamental component of mission management, and our leaders need to be better prepared to face the complex challenges of integrated mission in fragile and conflict-affected states. 38 graduates of the SML are currently serving in the leadership teams of peacekeeping operations, special political missions, and offices of special envoys. We believe that efforts to fully understand our challenges will help us to find solutions. I encourage you all to consider the recommendations outlined today by IPI. Improvements we make to the training of senior women and men in peacekeeping will resonate both today and with the next generation of peacekeepers. Improved leadership will also help our peacekeeping missions improve the protection of civilians while preventing human rights abuses and combating sexual exploitation and abuse. Canada will continue to support innovative efforts to improve peacekeeping operations. Thank you again to IPI for their exceptional work with this study, and we look forward to our discussion today. Merci beaucoup.
Thank you, Brigadier General. I'd now like to turn to Mr. Fabrizio Hochschild, Assistant Secretary General for Strategic Coordination in the Secretary General's Executive Office, to share a few words on why, in his view as a current senior leader, training is so vital to the implementation of UN peacekeeping operations.
No, thank you so much, and also congratulations to IPI for this initiative, and warm greetings to all of you and the many friends and colleagues I see in the room. I mean, the point has been made repeatedly, and the high-level panel report was quoted about the importance of leadership. Organizations' mandates thrive or fail on the basis of the quality of leadership. I think something has to be added to that perception of the importance of leadership, and that is that of all the factors that determine a successful outcome of a mandate, a successful outcome of a mission, the one we perhaps have most control over is leadership. I mean, there are events that unfold on the ground, there are political circumstances, even the allocation of resources are things we have very little control over. But one thing we do have control over is how we select, empower, and support our leaders. So that's why I think it's worth every possible investment, and why I think Canada's investment in training is so important. I would argue that leadership is now more important in the UN than ever, and perhaps also more difficult. It's no secret that some of the countries that traditionally have supported the UN without asking too many questions are now taking a more hesitant and a more critical approach. Multilateralism and its effectiveness is broadly questioned in ways that we haven't really seen since the Cold War. Geopolitics is back with a vengeance in a way that can often be paralyzing on multilateralism. So we have to prove our worth more than ever before. Whatever complacency we could enjoy in the past, now there's very little room for that. And that becoming more efficacious, having a greater impact, is really what motivated the Secretary General's reform. And of course, part of that reform is the delegation of authority, which above all is about empowering leaders on the ground. That leads to the question, what is effective UN leadership? And surprise, surprise, we do actually have a document done by the CEB, the Chief Executive Board, which defines what constitutes effective UN leadership across the UN system. It's called the United Nations System Leadership Framework, and it is actually a very good document. And it was one of the first the Secretary General revised when he came into office, and I'll come back to that point. I want to highlight 3 points that come out in this document, and then I'll conclude with that. The document highlights as at the essence of UN leadership the defense of norms, the focus on prevention, and the pursuit of the 2030 agenda. And you may think, well, maybe that's relevant if you're a resident coordinator, but in peacekeeping, it's not so relevant. I would argue that it's those qualities or those objectives are expected of all UN leaders. And I think that's one of the hallmarks of the leadership that this Secretary General is pursuing, and that is getting beyond the silos. Every senior staff member in the UN is expected to be a system-wide leader. They're not expected just to be the leader of their particular section, their particular sector, their particular expertise group, but they're meant to see across the system. And they're meant to see across the system and pursue solutions across the system because that's what the problems demand. There are very few problems out there that the UN confronts that can be treated in a siloed way as pure peacekeeping problems or pure human rights problems or pure development problems. They're a combination of all. So our leaders also need to think across systems, across mandates. They also need, and that brings us to the prevention idea, to be more anticipatory. And then being more anticipatory also means having better analysis, cross-system analysis, getting out of our bubbles and joining together the different information systems that inform leaders. I mean, I've served in a number of peacekeeping missions where we had good JOCs, good JMACs, but frankly, they weren't always very much in touch with the development actors, with the humanitarian actors, with the human rights actors. So they were, even if their job was to bring together joint analysis, it was often coming from a very limited number of sources. And I think under the prevention agenda, that's also something we need to get better at to serve the purpose of leadership better. The second issue I want to highlight is the issue of upholding norms. I mean, that is at the essence, that's what the UN stands for. It's the essence of our work. It was alluded to in the protection of civilians, which the importance of which was reaffirmed in the Action for Peacekeeping. But upholding norms in these times when there's, as the Secretary General has told the Human Rights Council, I think this morning, at the times where there's a lot of blowback on human rights, where human rights is often seen as polarizing or lapsing from neutrality, is extremely difficult. And it takes courage, but it also takes clarity. And one of the Secretary General's favorite words is the importance of being smart. So this part has to be thought of very strategically, with a lot of courage, but also with a lot of clarity. And I think that sort of clarity of thought, combined with courage to pursue norms, is also what is expected and very necessary of our leaders. And the third thing and final thing I want to emphasize is impact. When the Secretary General saw the first draft of this statement setting out what were the essential elements of UN leadership, the first thing he said was, I agree with everything in here, but what is lacking is the focus on tangible impact. And so that now is put right up front on what characterizes good UN leadership in action. And I think ultimately we do have to think about what difference is our leadership making, not in terms of the respect we may or may not be getting with our supervisors, not in terms of whether we're pleasing or displeasing our member states, not in terms of only in terms of how motivated our staff are, although that is critical, but frankly, what difference are we making for those for whom, and these are the Secretary General's words, we are a necessity and a hope? What difference are we making in the lives of those whom we are here to serve? And I think that is the ultimate test of the success of our leadership and something that we have to keep coming back to. But I think what is very important is that we keep reflecting on what constitutes effective leadership in changing times. And I think IPI's initiative of repeatedly having debates on the subject is very valuable. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Fabrizio. I think you've given us a good overview and a good starting point. So now, without further ado, I'm going to turn to the panel. I won't take up any more time introducing the panel that I have up here with me today because you have their bios in the handout. To start us off, we have Mr. Kevin Kennedy, who has played a significant role in the work of IPI in developing these scenarios and as well as lead author of the recently published report. So, Kevin, I turn it to you.
Thank you, Lesley. First of all, thanks to IPI and to Canada for giving us this opportunity, and to Canada also for contributing so much over the years to peacekeeping training. I'd also especially like to thank Laura Powers for her assistance in putting together the report that you have in front of you, and to Lesley and to Jake for their excellent advice and guidance on the project. Basically, our report takes a very critical look at training for senior mission leaders, but I think we first must acknowledge how much has been accomplished in peacekeeping training overall. Almost 2 decades ago, when Jean-Marie Guénaud first publicly introduced the Brahimi Report, he pointedly said that the UN could no longer afford to continue with the gifted amateurism that had characterized the UN's approach to peacekeeping up to that time. Peacekeeping is still in many ways improvisational, but it has professionalized. A substantial body of unique doctrine, policy, and guidance has been built on decades of experience and lessons learned. The Secretariat and the member states have developed, rolled out, and sustained training on topics and tasks relevant to military and civilian peacekeepers at all levels. The training audience has become more diverse. It remains a challenge to manage training that matches the scope and pace of the evolution of mandates and doctrine, the constant rotation of personnel from the scores of countries, and the emergence of new threats against peacekeepers and the people they're mandated to protect. To the credit of the person just one over to my right, to a large extent, and to her service, the senior leadership appointments section, which has been renamed. The audience for peacekeeping training at the leadership level has, of course, become more diverse, with the recruitment and appointment of ever more women in mission leadership teams. We also have to acknowledge that the Secretariat, with the support of some member states, has made sustained efforts to develop and deliver training for senior mission leaders. Now, the words leadership, accountability, and integration appear in almost every discussion of peacekeeping. Our report has highlighted that where missions have suffered setbacks and failures in recent years, lack of cross-component integration and weaknesses in leadership teams have almost always been identified as significant contributing factors. Successive secretaries general, high-level panels, internal investigations, evaluations, dependent studies, and inquiries have all highlighted that leadership and integration of effort as critical to address the challenges of peace operations. In essence, integration and leadership are flip sides of the same coin. Now, as Fabrizio has just mentioned, the current Secretary General has stressed the overarching importance of leadership in the organization as a whole. The leadership framework that he talked about sets out the defining characteristics of UN leadership for a new leadership culture, a framework that curiously makes no specific mention of peacekeeping or peace operations generally. And in fact, on the CEB, the Secretary General sits as representative, and in his delegation, neither DPPA nor DPO are represented. At the same time, the Secretary General Guterres has also initiated major changes in the Secretariat's peace and security architecture, in its management structures and processes, and in the UN development system. These reforms all, as Fabrizio has mentioned, have significant implications for mission leadership teams in peacekeeping missions. When the SG presented to the General Assembly his proposal to reform the peace and security architecture, he expressed his commitment to greater investment in staff training and development, including leadership coaching and leadership and management training. But almost simultaneously, Mr. Guterres explained to the Security Council that the reduction in funding had removed all institutionalized support for peacekeeping leadership training, and that the lack of sustainable resources continues to curtail our efforts to support training and capacity building. As a result, despite the risks associated with deploying senior mission leaders who lack adequate preparation, the Secretariat continues to scramble for voluntary and ad hoc funding for senior leadership training. There's plenty of high-level rhetoric about the importance of mission leadership, but there's little evidence that senior UN officials truly consider a systematic approach to training and learning support a necessity that should be an integral part of the recruitment, appointment, and deployment process. Senior mission leaders continue to be recruited and appointed without any personalized, systematic assessment of the training or learning support they might need in the knowledge and skills required to fulfill their functions. No one entity in the Secretariat has the responsibility or the authority, much less the resources, to guarantee that senior mission leaders receive the training and learning support they need before deployment and throughout their service. A minority of senior mission leaders, despite the numbers that have attended the SML, benefit from participating in the senior mission leaders course, and participation in the SML seldom, if ever, seems to be taken into account in selection and appointment. Little or no support is provided to heads of mission or their leadership teams, either to build and sustain well-functioning teams or to help teams that are in trouble. What's wrong with this picture? This is not rocket science. Many mission leaders have served with distinction. This isn't a criticism of mission leadership. They've overcome challenges by drawing on their own experience and their strengths, with little or any, or in many cases, any leadership training or preparation from the UN. Certainly not preparation, training, and learning support that's commensurate with their responsibilities. If you'll forgive the American baseball reference, this report could have been entitled Deja Vu All Over Again. The issues we explore have been well known for a long time. Our recommendations are an attempt, once again, to prompt action. The measures we propose don't involve the creation of new structures. They do, however, require a systematic approach and dedicated resources, and a healthy dose of common sense. The women and men who agree to serve as senior mission leaders deserve a system that prepares them better for the challenges that they face in the field and to help them in the performance for which they will be held accountable. Thank you.
Thank you, Kevin, for, I think, this frank assessment and overview of some of the challenges. Whilst you said it's not new, I think that you've really touched on the issues around funding, around the gaps between recruitment and training, and the need for a centralized architecture to really drive forward an integrated approach to training. And with that, I now turn to our second speaker, Mr. Mark Peterson, Chief of the Integrated Training Services within the United Nations, to expand a bit on these remarks and really look at the role of training within the broader discussions within the UN community.
Thank you. Firstly, thanks to Canada and to IPI for supporting both the report and the event. Thanks also to Kevin and Laura for their work on the report. It's a strong report which shows a clear way forward. I intend to seat my remarks on leadership around one theme: enhancing performance. Over the last almost 3 years, UN peacekeeping has seen a series of investigations, beginning with the Commett report into protection of civilians' failings in South Sudan, running through to the Dos Santos Cruz report. The Dos Santos Cruz report was an independent report given directly to the Secretary General. When he received that report on the 19th of December in 2017, he wrote on the cover that it revealed worrying flaws that required urgent action. As many of you know, that resulted in the ongoing action plan, which focuses on 4 areas: mission footprint, accountability, capacity, and mindset. I don't want to diminish the importance of any of the areas, but I think the most important is mindset. The underlying focus of the Cruz report is to enhance performance. The key element of performance is effective leadership, and effective leadership at the top of an organization helps to create a climate of excellence. Effective leadership can overcome deficiencies in equipment, tough living conditions, and the extremes of life in field operations. Kevin's paper recognises the essential elements of leadership: technical competence, knowing the policies, practices, rules, and regulations. In short, knowing peace operations. The ability to build and lead effective teams. And personal qualities, chief amongst them, integrity and resilience. Being able to keep going and to lead by example. His paper focuses on 4 themes: centralising responsibility for training, integrating training into planning and recruitment, more support for training, and employing new tools for training. I'll leave the first 2. Gabriella is far more competent than I am to speak on those, and I'll speak a little bit about the last 2. Since 2016, ITS has made significant progress towards a leadership architecture at the operational and tactical levels, and opening up opportunities to enhance female participation in leadership roles. Cascading downwards, we all know the Senior Mission Leaders course, most generously sponsored in recent years by Canada, and its post-selection partner, the Senior Leadership Program. On the military side, we now have a Force Commanders course, a Sector Commanders course, and an Infantry Battalion Commander course. These last two flow directly from the Dos Santos Cruz report. On the police side, we have a Police Commander course and a Formed Police Unit Commander course. Once we've proven the model, both the Police Commander course and the Battalion Commander course will become requirements for service. Turning to civilians, we have the Mission Advanced Staff Training, which is directed towards Mission Chief of Staff and Mission CMS. These are often the most senior Secretariat personnel in the mission. And at the mid-level, the Senior Mission Administration and Resource Training. Throughout all of these courses, we use adult learning approaches with experiential learning. General Gordon, who plays a key role in many of our programs, knows personally the value of underpinning training with experiential activities. Training, however, is nothing without practice. Missions are now required to run exercises and rehearsals at all levels, ranging from infantry company up to mission leadership level. UNMISS is a clear leader in this area with a well-developed and continual exercise program. Force headquarters are supported by a member state-led command post exercise program. Missions now undertake New York headquarters-led stress tests, which assess their ability to manage crises at the leadership level, as well as to undertake a practical test of their ability to conduct a casualty evacuation. Exercises also focus on the deputy or second-in-command level, as we all know from our own crises that these most often occur when the boss is not there. It always falls on some poor person who's left alone in the headquarters to resolve. The IPI developed scenario leadership exercises will make an invaluable contribution to both training and exercising. Scenario-based training and exercising are the way to go. They allow teams to practice their skills in a controlled environment. The focus is on getting the process right, rather than getting the right answer. If you can get the process right and practice the process, you have a resilient way of tackling problems that you can replicate when the time comes to focus and to address operational challenges. Taken together, training and practice should go a long way to achieving our shared and often stated goal of enhancing performance. No one can dispute that leadership is a key element in performance, and I think perhaps the key element. My closing comments may come as a surprise to many. The leadership architecture and exercise and rehearsal program that I've outlined represent considerable progress and a significant investment in the shared goal of member states and the Secretariat to enhance performance. This ensemble of activities is a house built on sand. And I'll say it again, it's a house built on sand. There is no support account funding for any of it, and thus the continued future of these activities is not predictable. All the programs are reliant on the generosity of a few member states who either fund these activities directly or provide in-kind contributions of skills, hosting courses, or other forms of invaluable support. Or the programs are supported by a levy on missions. If we want performance and we truly believe in the value of leadership, we need to invest in it, and that sadly means paying for it. Put leadership training on a sustainable funding basis so that we in the Secretariat can spend 100% of our time focused on outputs, outcomes, and the effects of leadership, rather than the input of securing funding to enable these programs. Once again, I'd like to thank IPI, the Government of Canada, Kevin and Laura, for enabling this discussion on the value of leadership training. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. I think you've really highlighted the need for training and the need for continuous practice. And I think connected to that triangle, though, is the aspect of recruitment. As often has been stated, whilst we can have all the tools in the world to train leaders, we need to ensure we are recruiting the right people for the right context. Our next speaker is Ms. Gabriella Seymour, Chief of the Leadership Support Section, who has been doing extraordinary work to improve the recruitment system. And I now turn to her to provide more sort of analysis and thoughts on the connection between training and recruitment.
Thank you. Thank you to IPI for inviting me to participate today in the discussion, and thanks to the Government of Canada and to the authors of the report, Kevin and Laura, for keeping the spotlight focused on senior leadership training in peace operations. Our approach to senior leadership training and support is more than just goodwill and wishful thinking. As the report and my former panelists note, we have come a long way over the past almost 20 years. We're very good at understanding the gaps, weaknesses, and problems, and we're quite good at building the architecture to address this. But as Mark notes, our progress is precarious and will remain so while the importance of getting the leadership right and investing and supporting in it continues to take a back seat to the more tangible and practical challenges of peacekeeping today. Expedience, the immediacy of the challenges on the ground, often over ambitious mandates and impossible deadlines, sometimes trump best laid efforts to provide comprehensive pre-deployment in briefings and training. Nevertheless, it is important that our leaders, before they deploy, at a minimum understand their role. We need to ensure that incoming mission leaders fully understand that they serve both as the Secretary General's special representative as well as the head of mission. This is even more important now since January 2019, additional responsibilities have been delegated by the Secretary General to heads of entities, including heads of mission. They also need to understand the expectations of them and on which aspects they will be appraised on a yearly basis, and in turn have a clear idea of their own expectations of the Secretariat and the support that we can provide. In other words, how we select, appoint, support, and appraise our leaders should be intrinsically connected by what we call a leadership life cycle. This approach, or referred to earlier as the selection, training, and appraisal triangle, extends beyond initial appointment to induction, in-briefing, early deployment, and indeed the duration of the field posting, and links the different stages of leadership through a serious accountability mechanism, the outcome of which should have a direct influence over any renewal of appointment. Let me say a few words on the 3 points of the triangle and on how training and other tools can be used to cement between the three. On selection, heads and deputy heads of mission are selected by the Secretary General. However, the Secretary General has traditionally delegated authority to run the selection process to the lead departments, which in turn propose recommended candidates to the Secretary General for final decision and appointment. Any selection process starts or should start with the development of post profiles and terms of reference, which should clearly lay out responsibilities, requirements, and reporting lines. In this sense, they serve not only as a selection tool, but also as an element of an appraisal mechanism. This is one linking element. Selection processes have over the years improved. In 2016, our section conducted a review of the process with a view to strengthening the way we assess the candidate's leadership attributes. The review included a survey addressed to individuals involved in the selection processes of the lead departments, former panelists, interviewees, and regional division directors. The results of the survey and the assessment tools review provided a number of recommendations that we integrated into the Secretary General's system-wide gender parity strategy. Among the most pertinent for this discussion are those which propose to supplement the interview process with tools to assess the softer attributes of leadership, such as personality testing, and augmenting the interview itself by introducing scenario-based questions. The latter have already been initiated. As another linking element, scenario-based training could be used in a summarized version as interview questions and selection processes. I think more collaboration between my section, the lead departments, and ITS and IPI could be done here. Subsequently, selection process results could be used to identify areas for improvement for more tailored in-briefing, as well as induction and tabletop exercises. More on this later. Or this could feed into individual knowledge and training needs assessment, as recommendation 3 of the report says. And that brings me to the second point in the triangle, leadership support. Leadership support includes training as well as any support programs designed to support a senior leader throughout their assignment. The Leadership Partnering Initiative, a sort of mentoring program for heads and deputy heads of mission, was launched by my section in November 2014 within existing resources. It's a good example of what can be offered to senior leaders throughout their appointment. And mentors, by the way, serve on a pro bono basis. The Leadership Partnering Initiative is confidential. It's a tailored on-the-job learning process conducted through one-on-one pairing of incoming senior leaders and a professional who currently serves or has served in a similar capacity. They share with each other their knowledge about and the institutional culture and practices, experiences, and lessons learned. To date, we've been able to administer 29 relationships involving SRSGs, DSRSGs, and DSRSG RCHCs. Feedback has continued to be highly positive. It's now considered a standard practice with leadership partners reaching out to each other in times of crisis. The initiative has also allowed us to conduct the first ever female heads and deputy heads of mission retreat in March last year, and the consequent establishment of a strong and supportive community of female leaders. Further articulation of an innate and learned traits associated with strong leadership will help to strengthen selection processes as well as the type of training and support offered to mission leadership. By extension, we will be better equipped to develop a credible performance appraisal mechanism, which goes beyond assessing delivery on mandates to individual performance. This is the third point on the triangle, the appraisal system. The current system of compacts between the Secretary General and heads of mission should be complemented by relevant appraisal tools. While we all know and recognize what bad leadership looks like and can sadly point to many examples and consequences of bad leadership, we don't have a systematic way of addressing poor leadership. Complementing compacts with the aggregated results of 360s used as a development tool is one way currently being explored by the organization. We will continue to be active partners in this endeavor, firm in the belief that such appraisals should have a direct bearing on renewal of appointments, decisions, as well as future appointments. And as has been said many times, we all agree that no amount of training can make up for bad leadership. All aspects of the leadership lifecycle warrant attention that extends beyond genuine goodwill to predictable, sustainable, and targeted support, to the identification, selection, training, support, and appraisal of our senior mission leaders. Thank you.
Thank you, Gabriella. And now to round us off, we have our last speaker, Major General Robert Gordon, who's providing us with a perspective outside of the headquarters views, which we have heard previously on the panel. Major General Robert Gordon has been a senior mentor at the Senior Mission Leadership Training Program and part of the team that created Karana, the scenario that's used in the basis of many training scenarios. And he's going to provide us with some practical and more concrete reflections from some of the leaders that he's been working with. So, Robert.
Lesley, thank you very much. Conscious I'm coming at the end here, and you've had a long lunch break already. But I just want to start by joining my colleagues in thanking the Canadian government and IPI for this important and very timely initiative. This whole subject is something I've been directly involved with, as Lesley has indicated, for 15 years since I finished as a UN force commander. And in that time, I have written a number of reflections on the state of UN senior leadership selection, its training, its preparation, and its support. And as you heard, have been involved in a lot of these training programs. I therefore hugely welcome the effort of both IPI and Kevin and Laura to pull much of this dialogue together in such, I think, a cogent and helpful way with really solid recommendations. And I do hope that this is a sign of an improved focus on this subject, because, to be very frank, it has been a subject which over the years has generated many grand words from member states and senior UN management, but actually little genuine action and commitment. Kevin's intercession paints an all too familiar picture. It was only very recently that a USG responsible for UN operations in the field said in a training forum that we still tend to throw our senior leaders into the pool without really knowing whether they can swim or not. But as we've heard from Mark and Gabby, things have certainly got better, but I would say they needed to. The baseline was very low. If I reflect upon my own preparation as a practitioner in this business for a senior leadership position, it was effectively a bewildering 3-day run around countless secretariat offices and some rueful expressions of good luck, you'll need it. And we've come a long way since then, but in retrospect, I have to say that I was very ill prepared, and it probably showed by my performance in the field. And in those days, the world of peace operations is very different from what it is now, and it's much nastier and more complex than it was then. So I do acknowledge the progress, and I think the question we have to ask, though, is has that progress been systematic and has it been institutionalized? Now, last year, and I acknowledge some colleagues here who know what I'm talking about, I undertook with a senior retired UN colleague on behalf of what was then DPKO-DFS, a review of authority, command and control in UN peacekeeping operations. The result of that policy review is still being discussed within the Secretariat, so it's not appropriate for this forum, but suffice to say that what was very stark from the countless field interviews we undertook was the difference between those senior leaders, both civilian and in uniform, who had had some form of dedicated training and preparation for UN operations, such as an SML, and those who had not. This had a direct impact upon their understanding of their role and responsibilities and how to work within the UN's complex and unfamiliar system of authority, command and control for the better or the worse results. But the fact that we still managed to deploy senior leaders to these highly complex and intractable operations with insufficient preparation speaks to the point in Kevin's paper and echoed by Mark, that senior leadership training, preparation and support, despite the welcome areas of progress, is still inadequately systemized, institutionalized and resourced. We have an expression in English that we are preaching to the choir. Actually, this is the choir standing up now, preaching to the congregation, because we have 2 people on this panel who work, Mark and Gabby, who work on these issues full time. They get it, but they have very limited staff and resources to make them necessary changes. So I have to ask whether they are truly representative of the UN system, and also whether they are wholeheartedly supported by that system. The trouble is that in the UN, training is still a controversial word. It has to navigate between the scylla of member state responsibilities for training and the charybdis of the widely held belief that training is not necessary for senior officials. They should just be recruited. So when resources are tight, it is the first to go. It therefore tends to become what we do have, a rather ad hoc, and the UN becomes a supplicant to donors to help fund and provide the necessary tools which we all know are required. IPI's support to scenario-based and case study training is a case in point. And as a sidebar, and because I've got the floor, there is a parallel here with planning. All believe in it and say how important it is within the UN, but the culture for it remains weak and it is rarely driven downwards from the top. Now, the various reviews mentioned by Mark have all stressed the importance of good leadership, but there's not much in the A4P work on how we intend to deliver it. Perhaps some of this is because in English we use the word leadership to mean 2 different things. Firstly, we use it as the cadre of senior management in the sense of the mission's senior leadership was taken by surprise. Or we use it as a quality we call leadership, which does the right thing and gets others to do it as well, in the sense that the SRSG showed good leadership in a crisis. So what we're actually talking about can often be misunderstood or blurred, especially for the non-native speakers who perhaps don't understand the nuance of what the reference is. Mark, in his piece, spoke of the need for effective leadership. And by that, I presume he meant the quality which good leaders need in the challenging world of peace operations. But how good are we at finding these people and then helping them adjust their innate leadership skills to UN complexities is a big question. In my recent review across a number of field missions, I came across, no doubt, plenty of good leaders as recognized by their member states, but nevertheless were people who were struggling in the UN environment through insufficient preparation and support. I have to say that I also came across people in positions of authority and responsibility who could not be called effective leaders. But the UN is certainly not unique in this. In my experience, no national entity, and I'm speaking now to member states, in my experience, no national entity intending to deploy integrated capabilities into complex and high-risk environments would countenance doing so without thorough and systematic preparation, both of the individuals and of the teams. And yet the UN is expected to do so with ad hoc resources and disparate and understaffed structures. So we come back to the need to match our talk with our actions on the subject. It is for all of us to sense whether we now have an opportunity to centralize and systemize responsibility for UN senior leadership training and preparation, resource it properly, and embed it into the recruitment and selection process of our senior leaders, while providing for them the full suite of individual and team leadership development tools, including e-learning, and I recognize the Peacekeeping Operational Training Institute here, who are leading in this field in e-learning, including scenario-based training and case studies, and IPI have done some wonderful work on that, and including initiatives like the Challenges Forum Consideration Study, and to put what is needed for senior leaders onto a smartphone app. And this is all good. There's no shortage of these good tools. And it doesn't seem too much to ask to try and systemize this process. I therefore welcome this IPI initiative, endorse Kevin and Laura's excellent paper and its helpful recommendations, and hope the member states here present can, in partnership with the Secretariat, assist in championing and driving the changes that are still very much needed to mainstream this issue of senior leadership. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Robert. I think you've put out a direct call, and I think you've given us a lot to think about. And with that, I now turn to the floor to open it up for questions and comments. I think we have a wealth of knowledge in the room, so I'd welcome any questions or comments to the panel. Just raise your hand and the microphone will come around, and we'll try to take a few rounds. So any questions or comments? I think there's one over there. Okay.
I read from the website of IPI that there is another research paper associated with this project on the gender mainstreaming in senior leadership course. So I wonder when that would be available. We really look forward to that. Thank you.
Thank you. I think we'll take a few questions before turning to the panel.
Thank you very much, Cornelia, UNICEF Haiti. It was said at the beginning that courage and clarity lie at the heart of leadership. I would go one step further, and I would say it's about inspiration and influencing. And that means that the leader must be able to live up to his own best self and to share that with others. And I was wondering why the two practical training tools that would relate to that, emotional intelligence and stress management on the one side and communication and persuasion on the other hand, are absent from an otherwise very comprehensive training package. And if there are plans to add that. Thank you.
Good afternoon, Astrid Irgang, Center for International Peace Operations, Berlin. My question is, did you include the subject feedback in your research? Thank you.
Great, I think we have two on this side.
Joanna Meyer, thank you very much. At the beginning of the talk, someone mentioned the lack of funds for this kind of training, and I'm going to assume that that has to do with the United States changing its funding. Are we seeing other member states stepping up to cover that loss of funds? Thank you.
Great. I think we'll take one more question at the back and then turn it back for some responses.
Hi, I must confess that I haven't read the concept paper, but I was just curious as to the methodology followed for the development of the scenarios and identifying the necessary material, since it's so important to really tackle the issues that the air strategies are facing. And who were the authors that participated in the development of the scenarios? Thank you.
Great. I'll just take the first and the last question before turning to the speakers. So on the gender mainstreaming paper, that is the last component of this project, a research paper looking at how gender has been mainstreamed in senior leadership training and preparation of leaders. This paper has been written by Sarah Taylor, who's the manager of IPI's program on women, peace and security, and should be out by the end of March. And that should really provide, I think, a good complementary analysis to Kevin and Laura's paper, but looking specifically at the gender components. On the last question, on the scenarios and the methodology, this has been a long process at IPI that started in the middle of 2017 with a workshop of experts where we had both current leaders, former leaders, those involved in training, both from the UN side and training centers, to identify what are the key and contemporary topics that are being faced and where are the gaps. So we've really tried in these scenarios to provide topics that are not already being trained on. And I think that two good examples of that are the ones on delegated authority and the one on integrated planning, because these are two topics which come up quite a bit with the UN reforms. And the authors are a mix of both IPI staff, so there are training experts, there are experts, thematic experts, we have a wide variety, I think, who have really contributed to the scenarios. And the scenarios have then been reviewed by some of the close advisors working on this project, and most of them have been piloted or tested out in different contexts in the senior leadership program, the senior mission leadership program, and with some training centers, for example, with Volker Bernadotte and their senior women talent pipeline training. So these scenarios we can talk further later about the specifics around it, but that's sort of a short overview. And I'll turn it to Mark if you want to make some comments first.
Thank you. I'll leave the 360 answer to Gabriella. In answer to your question on the funding, it would be wrong to ascribe the diminishment of funding to any particular member state. Over the last 5 years, we've seen a 50% reduction in support account funding for training, plus the cutting of posts. And as I think it was Kevin had said, that when it comes time to look around for things to cut, the member states often desire is to go down the line of least resistance, which tends to be things like training. Since you mentioned the United States, it's actually an extremely generous funder in terms of its extra budgetary contributions to some of our core activities. And it would be wrong just to speak about the United States in terms of extra budgetary support. We are reliant on a very small group of countries, some of whom might surprise you, who provide us with everything from money to run programs through to hosting of programs, as I mentioned in my short presentation, the provision of experts, meals and accommodation. It all goes to make the small support account training pot go further. But there's no single driver, no single country behind the cut in the support account. You see that in the Fifth Committee where there's continual downwards pressure on training.
Yeah, and with deference to Mark, and maybe just to add a couple of words on that, the decline in funds, guaranteed assessed funds for supporting peacekeeping training that the Secretariat does, well predates the current financial crisis. If you go back to 2010, I think it was 2010, 2011 period, the ITS budget was essentially halved. The amount of money that was allocated for peacekeeping training to be administered by ITS was cut in half as part of a deal on the support account. Another issue that I think needs to be looked at carefully is what that represents. That training money, at least in that period, and Mark would know better now, included everything in the Secretariat that different departments felt needed to be invested in training in their areas to support peacekeeping. So the actual amount that was allocated to ITS to support what we might call specific peacekeeping training, and not, for example, training for lawyers working for the Office of Legal Affairs who deal with peacekeeping-related issues, just one example, not to single out OLA, really does give you a better idea of what the overall basket of funds available to support peacekeeping training is. The other thing to bear in mind that funding doesn't necessarily go out and train individuals. The vast majority of the funding that's allocated for peacekeeping training from the support account is used to support member states in the development of standards, of materials, and in rolling out support to member states to carry out their own funding, which is appropriate. When you get to the area of leadership training, that took perhaps the biggest hit when these cuts were initially made, so that it was essentially zeroed out, leaving it entirely dependent on voluntary funding. Now, without kicking this into a plane that this forum isn't convened to discuss, a lot of this had to do with, at the time, an obsession with keeping the total cost of peacekeeping down below X number of dollars. It was a political decision. We couldn't exceed a certain number of $1 billion because that was going to ring alarm bells. Peacekeeping is a bargain. And we're not talking in terms of training, the cost of adding 10 utility copters to every peacekeeping mission that's operating in a country that's a continental size. We're talking about essentially what are costs that are on the margins of a budget for something where the UN has huge reputational risk and huge responsibilities. So there are those issues that are the dollars and cents issues. There's also, in my view, the image issue, and that is, who does the training belong to? It's very good to have voluntary funders of training, but when those voluntary funders tend predominantly to come from one area of the world or from one group of member states, you start wondering who owns peacekeeping. And you start wondering whose brand it is. Now, Mark mentioned funders that might surprise you. Yes, there are those that fund from other regional groups or from other groups. But the fact is, the UN identity of the training is critically important if the organization is going to maintain its legitimacy and its credibility on the ground, if its leaders do not articulate the kinds of norms and values and the principles that Fabrizio was mentioning. Once it becomes owned by somebody else, you don't necessarily have control over that. Thank you.
Great, Gabriella.
Yeah, sorry. I wanted to get a bit more clarity on the question, the 360 question, and on the other traits that you were asking would be integrated into the SML and the other training courses provided. Again, there I heard emotional intelligence, and of course, training for emotional intelligence. In my personal view, I think you have emotional intelligence or you don't. It's one of the things that we would underline the importance of the selection process, what goes into the selection process and how you assess for that, and given its importance as a trait of leadership, and it is something that I really would underline, and it's something that we've been looking at very closely and constantly questioning how do we better assess for.
I think before we turn to Robert, does the question on the 360 assessments? ZIF, yeah? Can we have the microphone?
Well, the question reflects to whether you teach how to how to organize 360-grade feedback, or whether the feedback question is crucial in your research for good leadership. So how can a leader receive feedback?
If I may, I think another way of talking about that would be, this is performance management. This is about appraisals. And of course, that's part of how we see the leadership life cycle. And critical to the leadership life cycle is the appraisal process. And I think this is an area that the UN can and should do better at, providing constructive feedback to heads of mission and deputy heads of mission is something that challenges our own leadership. And we have a very rudimentary idea, shall we say, but I mean, one of the things that we say is the better we identify what we need in that particular position, not just the responsibilities, but the type of skills that need to be brought to that, the better we're able to start looking at, well, how do we assess whether that individual has performed well? And how do we work out if that individual has been performing badly? How do we then go about the renewal process? We need some of those factors in order to be able to have an objective determination of whether or not to renew a head of mission or a deputy head of mission. And I think that's very, very much work in progress.
Robert?
I just want to say a few words in response to Cornelia. I'm not sure, Cornelia, who you represent, but it doesn't matter anyway, because I think you make a very, very fair point. And the dilemma we have in senior leadership training is, what do we put in and what do we leave out? And Mark and Ettore here, who's responsible for it for the UN, can speak to that. But I absolutely agree with you on the concept, and it's pretty esoteric, this, that we are all, as leaders, given our characteristics, but we can adapt our behavior if we understand how we come across. And there are very good exercises and models and training that can be undertaken. And I think given to senior leaders to show how they come across, whether they come across as inspirational, influential, or challenging, or bridging, or whatever. There are these mechanisms. At the moment, we don't put our potential senior leaders through that sort of assessment. If, as I believe we should, start mainstreaming senior mission leadership courses in order to create a cadre of people qualified to be selected by Gabby's selection process, then we do need to do that to help them understand how they can adapt their behavior, the better to be leaders in the field in this complex environment. So you make a very fair point.
Great. I think we have some time for some more questions. So if you can just identify yourself when you get the microphone. We can take the gentleman at the back and then the lady in the middle.
Hi, my name is Ashraf Swelam. I'm the director of the Cairo Center. I come today to this conversation in two capacities. One as the director of the Cairo Center and the host of the 2015 UNSML with ITS. And the question related to that is, I would be particularly interested to learn about the percentage of people that were trained in the UNSML that actually made it to become in a senior leadership position in UN operations, because I think that speaks to the value added of the training. The second thing, in my capacity as the member of the executive committee of the IAPTC, the International Association of Peacekeeping Training Centers, and maybe use this opportunity to, well, Mark is already invited because he sits on the committee with us, but invite the rest of the panel to be with us in the annual meeting of the organization in Peru that will take place in October. Leadership was identified as one of the big challenges that we face. And I think it provides, the annual conference would provide an important opportunity for IPI, the Government of Canada, to present its important work on training for training for leadership in peacekeeping operations, but also to present its work on the scenarios that were developed. And I look forward to your response. Thank you.
I think we had a question in the middle of the room.
I'm Valentina Resta. I'm from the Division for Public Institutions and Digital Government of UNDESA. My question is, and first complimenting you all for a very, very interesting debate, is about resources, but not just about physical resources, but human resources. So I hear on the first part of the resources prompt that we have difficulty in getting, funding for this critical leadership training. How do you ensure that you tap all the resources that are available within the UN system? For instance, my division of public administration works with all the schools of public administration around the globe on leadership training for SDGs. And there is quite a lot that is being done at also country level. So this could broaden a little bit the reach beyond UN and beyond New York. The second part of the resource question is about the human resources, the availability of people with traits, attributes, as Ms. Seymour was mentioning. And that's what Major Gordon was also hinting to. How do we develop a sort of a talent pipeline? As we said, it takes more time to train, and maybe if someone doesn't have that emotional intelligence skill, as you mentioned, Seymour, it takes much longer than train maybe technically someone who already has those attributes. So what is being done also to promote, again, cross-departmental collaboration in the sense? How can you tap the resources that might be already available across the system? Thank you.
Great. I think we can take some more questions if there are further hands or any comments to the panel. Great.
I know it's a no-no to ask two questions. Joanna Meyer, it's just to follow up on the emotional intelligence. I'm from California, and in California we abide strongly by the interest in personal growth. And so there's nonviolent communication. Certainly the UN could adopt more kinds of trainings in this regard, which would also help perhaps in the peacekeeping departments with how to conduct oneself in the correct way. Thank you.
Any other hands before we turn back to the panel? I think we have a question over here.
Hi, I'm at the Peace Operations Training Institute, and I was just wondering what mechanisms you had for... Oh, thank you. I know the paper talks about new technological tools and video conferencing and webcasts, and I think I would just like to hear you expand more on what that means. I just think that's a very, very interesting part of the paper.
Great. I'm going to turn it back to the panel, and perhaps each of you can reflect on the questions and then perhaps provide some closing remarks as we wrap it up. So this time we'll change it up and start with you, Robert.
Ashraf, welcome. All the way from Lima. Must have been yesterday. Yes, I think I'm going to defer to Mark or Ettore in terms of the percentage who have followed through the SML process. But what I would like to say, because it's also relevant to Valentine's question, is that when we run a senior mission leadership course, we have 6 seasoned mentors who put these people through some quite rigorous exercising and case study. And by the end of those 2 weeks, we have a pretty good idea whether they're going to swim or sink. And yet we have no say in their selection or preparation. And so we are spending a lot of your member state money on these processes, and we can tell the good ones and we can tell the bad ones, but the system doesn't use it because it's not systemized. And it's part of the point that we were making earlier. As to the IAPTC, yes, and again, Ashraf, thank you very much, P from Cairo in hosting it and running it last year. And it is an extremely good medium, and it's an extremely good medium for getting intravenous messages to the member states' training facilities. If we have those messages to give. So thank you for that. I think that's probably enough at this stage from me.
Gabriella? Okay. Well, again, I am not the expert on the senior mission leadership course, but I would say that my team, or a representative from my team, goes to that course in the second week, and that's a very good and informative way of being able to see how the participants interact with one another. But actually, more importantly, it's what goes into it. So, who are the member states nominating to go on the Senior Mission Leadership course, which is, as you know, partly divided between uniform and civilian personnel. Within the UN system, I know that we work really hard to try and have a better correlation between those individuals we know are going to be potentially competing for a position and selection, so that we can, of course, have them benefit from the course itself, and you'll see the correlation in that respect go up. With respect to traits and attributes and how do we develop a talent pipeline, I think that's that's obviously a very important question, and one really that could be better answered by human resources, secretariat-wide and UN system-wide. What I would say is that from our very tiny perspective, we have run something called the Global Call in 2017, which was a generic call for heads and deputy heads of mission, open to internal candidates, external candidates, member states who may nominate, or individuals who can nominate, self-nominate. And we're just about to launch the same global call again with a huge social media campaign where we're trying to get beyond perhaps some of the normal profiles that we will be looking at for heads and deputy heads of mission to those that still demonstrate the same attributes of leadership that the Secretary General has outlined in his leadership framework, but also individuals that may come from beyond government positions, ministerial positions, and so on and so forth. So we had in the last round, we had a very healthy percentage of D2s and above within the system applying. Anyone that did apply was reviewed. And it's a pool, it's not a roster. This is the Secretary General's appointments. There's no, this is up to him whether or not he will select individuals. What's important for us is that we have a pool that's deep enough and wide enough for us to be able to look in when there are appointments to be made. Thank you.
Great. Kevin?
Yeah, maybe just to comment a bit on the e-learning issue or the technology issue. The paper really dwells mostly on the institutionalization of senior leadership training within the system. We don't really get too far down the road of pedagogy or methodology, although there is some reference there, of course, to the call for increasing use of things that Mark mentioned, that is drilling, training, exercising, repetitive action that tests leadership teams and helps to test plans, test teams, and test stress, frankly. Having said that, I do think there's such a variety of things now that are available that are user-friendly for people at the senior level, that there are plenty of things that could be looked at given the decision to go ahead and do that. We did think about this, and in fact, in our discussions with current and former members of mission leadership teams, there is a kind of generational divide, but that's blurring constantly. And more you find people at the senior level who are quite comfortable with online work, with the use of online tools, with the use of social media, with the use of various sorts of e-learning tools, where in the past there might have been a resistance to get somebody to sit in front of her computer for 2 hours to do something if she could find the time. I think that resistance is disappearing. So that plus the use of communications tools that bring things together. Again, I have to congratulate Gabby and her team on initiating a kind of video conference initiative to bring senior leaders together to discuss common problems. When you look at the reforms that have been unleashed on people in the field, and right now their discomfiture at not knowing what the implications are, some sort of platform that allowed them to gather virtually and to discuss the common problems would be an excellent way to help them understand what's going on. So I would like to apologize for some deficiencies in the paper, including that we didn't go down that road very far. Also the fact that we didn't mention some areas that are of particular importance. One of them, for example, training in human rights and the implications of human rights for the conduct of all kinds of UN operations. And the other is the use of intelligence and going more on the whole issue of integrated planning, which Robert touched on. Those are things that require training, they require a common culture, and they require drilling, practicing, and exercising in order to really make them work in the field. So those are things that didn't get covered. And then maybe one final note. I know that there's a lot of discussion in the A4P context of sequencing of mandates, realistic mandates, and making sure that missions are tailored fit for purpose. I would suggest that if you put the expert level on the Security Council through the SML, if you made that a requirement, that the kinds of mandates that got written would be very different. Because I think they might understand the implications of what they were putting in blue and ultimately in black and ultimately pushing in front of mission leadership teams. We have had a couple of SMLs where people on the expert level, Security Council delegations have attended, and scales fell from their eyes. I'll leave it at that.
Great.
Thank you. I'll address Ashraf's question first since he looks ready to go. So looking back over the SMLs, the strike rate is about 40% of people ultimately get selected. There's a gap there, and there's a gap there for a number of reasons. One reason is it might just simply not be their time. Their face, their skill mix may not actually fit a vacancy. But equally, there are some people at the SML exposes, and we identify the fact that they may actually not be appropriate. So that's 40% who get selected to senior mission leadership posts. Then there's another group who go off back to their country to take up posts in their own government dealing with peacekeeping. And at one point, we had a couple of ambassadors on the Security Council who'd also been through the SML, which of course gave them a degree of knowledge and inspiration that their colleagues lacked. There's a question about talent pipelines and targeting people. So there are a couple of talent pipelines around. There's the female talent pipeline, there's the global core, which Gabriella described. Also, to an extent, we tend to go back to people that we have seen before. This is particularly the case for force commanders and police commissioners, where we expect them to have had a successful battalion command or senior staff command or police command before they get onto the list to attend the senior mission leadership course. On the civilian side, we often go back and target those who, through no fault of their own, may have missed out on a post, but did particularly well. And the reason why they missed out on the post, again, was their face may not have fitted at that particular time. But we recognise that they have qualities. You asked a question about ethical training. We do a lot of ethical training. Much of it is online, particularly related to pure ethics itself, conduct and discipline, sexual harassment. And we spend time in all of our courses actually discussing these issues so people understand what's required to be an ethical leader within the UN context. Fabrizio talked about the leadership framework, which also deals heavily with that. And we expect our leaders to be ethical. As I look back to those who have failed and some of those who've been removed, the core failing for them was an ethics question. The question about e-learning. We use e-learning in many of our courses at all levels for the provision of knowledge. In other words, we use e-learning to make sure that people have a common understanding of knowledge before they get into any situation which requires group work. And that is where we find it to be of the most use. So thank you.
Great, thank you, Mark. I want to thank the panel for taking the time to really speak with us and join us here today to discuss this important topic. I think that there's been a general recognition that there's a need for good leadership, but there's an acknowledgement that it's very hard to understand exactly what this is and how to integrate this into the both assessment, the training, and the preparation of leaders. We've heard a lot about the leadership life cycle and the need to really connect selection, support, and appraisal processes. Whilst there's been a large amount of progress made, and we've heard about the work from ITS to really improve the training of leaders, the work from the leadership support section to really select and assess leaders, there's still a large need to move beyond the rhetoric into actual action. And a lot of this connects back to funding and the need to have really reliable and predictable funding to support senior leadership. There's a need to institutionalize this approach and ensure that when we say that programs such as the Senior Mission Leadership Program are compulsory for prospective leaders, this is actually upheld and implemented. And there's a need to look for new training tools and innovations, and this touches on things like tabletop exercises, using e-learning, using more in-mission training, so not necessarily only bringing leaders out of the mission, but going into the mission to train them, and the use of scenarios. And whether these be long scenarios, short scenarios, any form of practical exercises to try and support leaders. So I think we've heard a lot. I think that when Kevin says there are deficiencies in the paper, he actually means there are lots of areas to continue research. And I think that I really want to thank those who have worked with us at IPI on this project, especially Laura and Kevin on this paper, ITS, who have really been instrumental in bringing a lot of these resources to light. And I look forward to continuing this work. So thank you for joining us here today. Thank you to the panel, and have a good afternoon.